Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for this virtual program presented by the West Orange Public Library. My name is Jane. I'm a youth services librarian here, but I'm happy to be hosting Mr. Medlin, who's going to be giving us a lot of great information about cryptocurrency. Feel free to ask questions. I'll turn it over without any further ado. Thank you so much for being here.
Great, thanks for having me, and thank you everyone for joining. This is actually going to be a two-part program. Tonight is part one, and in a couple of weeks we're doing another session, which is part two. And then you're welcome to join the second one. Tonight we're going to cover some foundational things, and then on the other session we'll talk about how to actually get involved acquiring or using Bitcoin or cryptocurrency. So if you have, I will stop at kind of logical places throughout my presentation just to check in, make sure everybody's okay. But if you do have a question about something as we're covering it, put something in the chat or raise your hand, and Jane will let me know and we'll try to address it at that time. So I am going to share my screen and pull up some slides, and we will get started. All right, so just real quickly, I am a certified blockchain professional. I'm an instructor, an educator, a mentor within that space. But my background is from the operations side. I'm not a program developer. I'm not a coder. So I like to approach these things not strictly from a technical perspective, but from, what is the impact and how do they work, and making sure we understand. Quick disclaimer, because we are talking about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, I'm just providing information. I'm not making any advice financially or for trading. This is all just, informational background. So as I mentioned tonight, we're gonna, kind of cover the background, why Bitcoin's important, how it works, and then the next session we'll talk about using Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in a real practical way. All right, little quick video. I use some videos and different things throughout my presentations just to keep it fresh. And when I find something that I think makes a good point, I might as well let them do it rather than me repeating it. But let's just get started.
So Bitcoin is a currency that exists on the internet, that is created on the internet, that really serves the needs of the internet generation. It does not belong to any government. It's not controlled by any bank. Bitcoin isn't a company or product or a service. It's an internet protocol. It's a method of communication, just like you say the web or email, and that doesn't belong to anyone. It's a shared common public good on the internet. Bitcoin is a digital currency and payment system that is a shared good, and it is controlled collectively by the participants in the network. And creating a currency that does not belong to a nation seems weird at first. But then again, we used to have airlines that only existed for one nation and had the flag on the tail, right? Flag carriers, they called them, and phone companies that were monopolies in one nation and had the flag on them. And now that seems absurd. And I think within 20 years, the idea of national currencies as the only option will seem absurd. What Bitcoin is a completely global and open system of money that anyone can participate in without asking permission, without registering for an account or showing ID. All they need to do is download an app. Just like if you want to participate on the web, all you need to do is download a browser. If you want to participate in Bitcoin, all you need to do is download the Bitcoin wallet. And the moment you do so without registering with anyone or creating an account, you can send and receive Bitcoin.
Okay, so we'll touch upon several of the concepts that he talked about as we go through, but cryptocurrency in general it's a new form of peer-to-peer digital money. And cryptocurrencies were launched, with the creation of Bitcoin, which is the first cryptocurrency. So let's look at what are some people saying about Bitcoin in public forums. Well, Stephen Colbert says it's gold for nerds, but one of the previous directors of the United States Mint said that Bitcoin and the ideas behind it will be a disruptor to the traditional notions of currency. And in the end, currency will be better for it. Warren Buffett is not a fan. I think he referred to it at one point as rat poison. But one of the former CEOs of Goldman Sachs tweeted out, he said, "I'm still thinking about Bitcoin, no conclusion, not endorsing it or rejecting it." But he added here, know that folks were also skeptical when paper money displaced gold, which is an important concept. And when credit cards and displaced cash, that was a new concept in money. So we're just talking about the next evolution. Paul Krugman says Bitcoin is evil. Richard Branson, pretty much a fan. Ben Bernanke, who used to chair the Federal Reserve, said virtual currencies may hold long-term promise, particularly if the innovations promote a faster, more secure, and more efficient payment system. But we've heard all this before, right? So banks are saying Bitcoin will never work. When the internet started, many people remember newspapers saying, oh, the internet will never work. Taxis said Uber will never work. So, the entrenched, system is always skeptical of a new technology that potentially can replace them. And as I said earlier, Paul Krugman said Bitcoin is evil, but it's interesting to note what he said back in 1998. He said by 2005, it'll be clear that the internet's impact on the economy has been no greater than the fax machine. So he was pretty far off on that prediction. Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google, said that Bitcoin is a remarkable cryptographic achievement, and the ability to create something that is not duplicable in the digital world has enormous value. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. And this is so big that you may have heard about Facebook's Libra project. They've since rebranded and changed the name, but basically Facebook came out and said they're going to create their own digital currency, their own money. So when you've got companies like Facebook with all of their resources saying we believe in digital currency, it's probably something to at least be aware of. And Bitcoin specifically has been operating for over 10 years. It's never been hacked. Its network has never been shut down, so it's very secure. But they said it wouldn't work. So one way to get your brain around Bitcoin is think of it as the ability to send anyone a gold coin over a communication network as easily as you would send an email. So it's much like sending information in an email, but in this case, you're sending information which has a value, currency. All right. Do we have any questions before we move on? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the background around Bitcoin. Quick video.
Bitcoin is a digital currency which aims to do away with all the problems we have paying for things online. You may think that the system we have is pretty good, But everything we buy today has to go through a bank or credit card company who take a cut of the transaction and who rely on our trust that they'll do everything right. After a while, those payments start to build up. And added to that is security. You have to trust your card company to keep your details safe. Many people have tried to work out how to have a payment system without that middleman. But then there's another problem. How do you prove that you've paid for something? Or even that you have that money at all, without someone vouching for you? It's so serious it has a name, the double spending problem. Then, in 2008, a solution was offered by an anonymous programmer going by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. Nakamoto left a paper on a popular cryptography blog which proposed a system of currency that solved all of these fiddly problems. His proposal was that instead of a bank or credit card company recording every transaction in one central ledger, all of the users would record all of the transactions at the same time. As a result, any attempt to fool the community would be noticed and the payment rejected. No one user, government, or bank can force a fee on a payment or control its flow. The result is a cheaper, quicker, and easier way to spend money, even across national borders. So this is Bitcoin, and it's already starting to have an impact on people's lives. Within months of the proposal, it was being used to buy and sell goods, although not always from the most scrupulous of traders. But it's not all shady businesses. Some shopping sites take it. You can buy pints in London and even pay for your university tuition. As you might have heard, there are problems. While some are profiting from getting involved early, others are losing out from this volatile and young market. And people are founding companies to buy up lots of Bitcoins. But as it's designed to have a limited amount ever in circulation, that might cause problems down the road. There's so much uncertainty around Bitcoin. Some people genuinely think this is the future. Others are terrified it could destroy our economy. But many from both sides agree that if we could get Bitcoin to work, or something like it, if we can trust a digital currency to work without the middlemen, then the way the world economy functions could be transformed for the better.
All right. So I like to tell people, you don't understand Bitcoin because you think money is real. The reality is almost all of our US dollars, about 90%, literally do not exist in any tangible form. So for every dollar in the monetary system, there is not a physical dollar bill representing that dollar. There's only 10% of it is real hard money. The rest are just entries on a ledger, right? So when you send money, if you pay online with your bank, you're not using real money. You're just basically updating ledgers between different entities. So you're already dealing with almost a virtual currency, almost 100%. Bitcoin is just 100% virtual currency instead of 90%. And in the past, some of us are old enough to remember, when you had silver certificates or gold certificates and money was backed by gold. We went off the gold standard a long time ago. We now have what's referred to as fiat money, which means it has value because the government says it has value. And that's the only thing that gives it value, is the fact that a government says it has value, right? So our money today is not really backed by anything other than the full faith and credit of the US government, so they say. I like this slide because it says, to learn how the Federal Reserve Bank works, refer to Rule 11 of the popular board game Monopoly. 11 says, what if the bank runs out of money, right? Well, the bank never goes bankrupt. You use slips of paper to keep track of everything, and when the bank, needs more money, they basically just print it, which is kind of what's going on right now. with all of the printing at the Federal Reserve. So, what is that? That's basically a representation of money by the government. The only difference between these two notes is your belief that one has more value than the other. But in reality, one has been fought over, destroyed homes, and torn families apart. The other is American currency. So, and, Andreas Antonopoulos says, why would anyone trust nerd money versus central bank money? And his point is, nerds brought you the internet and banks brought you the Great Depression. Friedrich Hayek, who won a Nobel Prize in economics, at one point said, I don't believe we'll ever have good money again unless we take it out of the hands of government. And he says, we can't take it violently out of the hands of government. All we could do is, by some sly roundabout way, introduce something they can't stop, which is pretty much what Bitcoin and several cryptocurrencies are designed to do. Banking establishments are more dangerous than standing armies. None other than Thomas Jefferson. So, there's a lot of issues around the banking system, and Bitcoin was pretty much designed to circumvent some of those issues. This is a clip from Milton Friedman, and he won a Nobel Prize in economics. This was from 1999, but if you listen to what he was talking about, you'll see that it kind of ties in with what we're talking about.
So that I think that the internet is going to be one of the major forces for reducing the role of government. The one thing that's missing, but that will soon be developed, is a reliable e-cash, a method whereby on the internet you can transfer funds from A to B without A knowing B or B knowing A. The way in which I can take a $20 bill and hand it over to you, and there's no record of where it came from. And you may get that without knowing who I am. That kind of thing will develop on the internet, and that will make it even easier for people to use the internet.
Which kind of predicted what we're doing now. So in 2008, as the video said, an anonymous programmer going by the name Satoshi Nakamoto created a white paper called Bitcoin, a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. And basically it described a system for electronic transactions without relying on trust. Basically the trust right now comes from a bank or someone in the middle taking care of facilitating that transaction. The Bitcoin network was created in 2009, and it solved that problem referred to as the double spend. And solving the double spend allows for digital uniqueness. And what do we mean by that? Well, if somebody has a digital dollar bill, for example, you have to be able to ensure that it can't be replicated and it can't be spent more than once or given to two different people, which is sort of what we have with picture files, Word documents, music files, everything else, right? You can copy those things and send them around freely, which is great because it allows you to share things. But that kind of flexibility does not work very well when you're talking about money. Money has to be something that can't be duplicated. Digital money has to be secure and can't be replicated or spent multiple times. People talk about, what is Bitcoin based on? Well, it's kind of based on the same thing everything else is based on. Why is the first issue of Superman comics worth over $3 million? Because somebody's willing to pay that price for it because they assign value to it. But in many respects, as I said, it's no different from the US dollar. It's not based on gold. It's not based on hard assets. So it's the value people assign to it. Other people talk about Bitcoin being used for criminal transactions. Obviously, with any technology, there will always be some criminal use of that technology. There is a certain amount of usage for criminal enterprises, but actually many reports and studies and analysis have been done. A very, very small fraction of Bitcoin is actually used for illegal purposes, and it continues to drop. Whereas if you look at the picture on the right, you know, when drug lords are raided, they tend to have stacks of cash sitting around. So we know cash's hands are not clean. You know, I don't know what to say. When that statement came out of his mouth, I think a lot of people around the world were laughing at him, but so be it. And also, you know, think about the money laundering that goes on in banks, right? This says a single bank location at one bank laundered more money than the entire market cap of cryptocurrencies. And, you know, $2 trillion, you know, laundered through the banking system, right? That's more than, that was at the time was more than the entire market of cryptocurrencies. You know, at one point, Deutsche Bank was fined for $10 billion of money laundering with Russian banks. The fine they paid was $700 million. And HSBC, they paid a $1.9 billion fine for laundering money, you know, through illegal activity. So again, you know, fiat money does not have clean hands when it comes to some of these issues. But, you know, it's an uphill battle because these governments will fight tooth and nail to defend their control of the currency. All right, any questions at this point of anything we've mentioned yet before we move on? Okay. So let's talk about why Bitcoin is important. Another quick video with Andreas Antonopoulos.
I think of it a bit like exchanging money as a tourist, right? So if you're living in Britain and you want to visit France, you go to France and you change some of your pounds into euros. Great. If you do that often, maybe you keep some of the euros between trips so you can have them for next time when you arrive at the airport. And if you go live in France for a while, maybe you start earning euros directly and you don't exchange as much. Well, I visit the internet as a tourist. So on the internet, I exchange my dollars into Bitcoin because that's the currency I can use to do online shopping in many ways on the internet very effectively, very securely, very fast. So to me, when I visit the internet, the currency of the internet is Bitcoin. Now, after a while, I moved to the internet and I started earning on the internet. And at that point, Bitcoin became the currency I earned in. And now, when I come to the UK, I'm a tourist here, I convert my Bitcoin into pounds in order to spend it here. But I'm still earning in Bitcoin. So if you think of the internet as a foreign country,
Okay.
Where some of us are permanent residents, right? Then you start understanding how Bitcoin can be a currency of choice for an internet generation.
And another short one here.
So if you look at the traditional financial markets infrastructure, and if you look at what you're defining as universal basic finance, do you see the two kind of interoperable, or do you see UBF as a complete replacement for the traditional markets?
Well, so it depends. There are some functions that you can't replicate with cryptocurrencies. For example, with cryptocurrencies, you can't do fractional reserve banking based on the unlimited printing of currency at zero interest rates, flooding the market with enormous asset bubbles. That's disappointing. I mean, how are the financial services companies going to make profit without risk? Or by externalizing the risk to the entirety of society? It's very disturbing. We'd better regulate that. You can't do credit in the traditional form. You have to do micro-lending and microcredit, which is basically not fractional. So you can only generate enough credit as other people see as investment directly. So you can't do those functions of traditional banking. But when it comes to storing currency, that function, it is unnecessary to do that function with an intermediary. Everybody can store their own currency, be monetarily sovereign, as they say in the most kind of die-hard angles of crypto. You don't need an intermediary to do payments, international cross-border payments from any recipient to any recipient. That's the fundamental concept of neutrality that exists on the internet, and digital currencies on the internet exhibit that same concept, that same principle of neutrality, and you can't stop it. So those functions do not exist in 25 years in the mainstream banking system, and the reason they don't exist is because no banking system can offer them with the cost, and more importantly, with the openness of open, public, borderless cryptocurrencies. You see, we're seeing a lot of the corporations now trying to compete. And the banking system really is caught between a rock and a hard place, or between a crypto system and Facecoin. Because on one end, here comes crypto, and it's offering an open borderless service that you cannot, by law, you cannot offer, you cannot participate in. You can't even play with that technology because you're required under the regulatory regime to KYC everyone you touch and to do all of this reporting. You have been inadvertently or vertently deputized into law enforcement. Worse, in the United States now, the banks have been deputized into the military. They've become direct arms of the military. They are fighting trade wars. They are fighting currency wars on behalf of the government. It's a very bad position to be in because you can't play in crypto. You are prohibited from playing in crypto. That's okay. Crypto serves a different purpose. But on the other hand, banks have traditionally been the greatest investors in technology and have prided themselves to be these beacons of technology and innovation. Well, here comes Facebook, here comes Silicon Valley, and they're not going after crypto. They can't. For exactly the same reasons the banks can't. They're regulated entities, they exist in jurisdictions, they're not open source projects that are not controlled by anyone. They're systems that are absolutely centralized and controlled, so therefore they will have to do all of the KYC, AML, and borders that traditional payment systems do. They cannot be open, borderless, neutral, censorship-resistant, transparent, public, immutable. Because all of those things are prohibited under the money transmitter and banking regulations. Therefore, they will be closed and centralized, censorship-laden, surveillance-driven. And they'll do that better than the banks, faster than the banks, with better interfaces than the banks, and they start out of the gate with 2.5 billion customers. You are so screwed if you are in the banking industry right now. It's coming from both ends, and you can't fight either side. But that's okay, because change is good. It's good for consumers. It's good for people. If I was in the banking environment right now, I would be screaming to stop the train of regulation, financial surveillance, and exclusion, because it will bury you without stopping any of your competitors who operate in the open source, borderless environment that the internet is.
So he covered a lot of things there, but I think you can see how this technology is really opening the gates to some very powerful tools that can really change the financial system. One thing to note is that Bitcoin is unique because cash is a currency, but cash is not a payment network. MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, they're payment networks, but they're not currencies. Bitcoin is both the currency and the payment network simultaneously, which gives it a lot of unique opportunities. So it's basically a currency. Think of it like any other currency like he spoke of on the video. It can be a store of value, similar to gold or silver. It's a payment system like Visa, MasterCard, PayPal. And it's the next evolution in payment systems, just as the credit card was when we previously only used cash. So who cares about Bitcoin? Well, if you live in a country like Venezuela or Argentina or Zimbabwe that has runaway inflation and whose money is basically worthless, you probably would rather store your assets in something that the government cannot hyperinflate and drive the value to zero. So, you know, the Venezuelan bolivar is pretty much worthless right now versus the US dollar. You know, in some countries around the world, I mean, this is literally, these are real pictures, right? The currency is so worthless that, you know, you got to push it around in a wheelbarrow to have any useful amount. But people around the world can take Bitcoin. You know, street vendors can accept Bitcoin and rid themselves of a little bit of the constraints of their national currency. Another short video, again, to talk about a few of these points.
We have a problem. And then, you know, you get to the point where, and we're seeing this in Venezuela now, where prices double while you're having a beer in the bar. And they say, okay, for the next round, the price is going to be double. And when people stop counting money and start weighing it instead of counting it, so you see people throwing a stack on. I remember the previous crisis in Zimbabwe, I was watching a BBC documentary. There's a guy pushing a wheelbarrow full of cash, stacks and stacks and stacks of cash. And they asked him, aren't you worried they're going to steal the money that you have in the wheelbarrow? He says, no, I'm worried that they're going to steal the wheelbarrow, which is worth more than the money that's in it.
So that's what some people are facing, right? Cup of coffee in Venezuela costs 1.4 million bolivars, just ridiculous. Inflation in Venezuela, we're talking about, you know, over 1,000,000%. You know, then it was projected to reach 8 million%. I mean, this is just numbers we can't get our brains around, right? Venezuela sets a new Bitcoin volume thanks to 10 million% inflation. So people are looking to, you know, get out of their currency if they can. So, you know, this money is worthless. In some places, you actually see it on the street. It's not worth bending over to pick up. And, you know, the smallest unit of a Bitcoin, because it goes out so many digits, is actually worth more than some national currencies, just because those currencies they've been devalued so much. So Satoshi Nakamoto, the creator of Bitcoin, said the root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. And even in the US, right? Since 1913, the value of a US dollar has dropped 95%. I mean, we all know you can't get as much as you used to get with the dollar. And it doesn't look like it's going to be getting any better anytime soon. This video, I kind of like it just because, you know, this guy's so passionate about the challenges with the banking system. So we'll run this one real quick.
For the EFT, Mr. Bloom has 2 minutes.
Commissioner, Mr. President, I rise again, I'm afraid, to make the same old hoary speech that I've been making here for several years, and that is, it is my opinion that you do not really understand the concept of banking. All the banks are broke. Bank Santander, Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, they're all broke. And why are they broke? It isn't an act of God. It isn't some sort of tsunami. They're broke because we have a system called fractional reserve banking, which means that banks can lend money that they don't actually have. It's a criminal scandal, and it's been going on for too long. To add to that problem, you have moral hazard, a very significant moral hazard from the political sphere. And most of the problem starts in politics and central banks, which are part of the same political system. We have counterfeiting, sometimes called quantitative easing, but counterfeiting by any other name. The artificial printing of money, which if any ordinary person did, they'd go to prison for a very long time. And yet governments and central banks do it all the time. Central banks repress the amount of interest that rates are, so we don't have the real cost of money. And yet we blame the real retail banks for manipulating LIBOR. the sheer effrontery of this is quite astonishing. It's central banks that manipulate interest rates, Commissioner. And plus, underneath all this, we talk loosely, in a rather cavalier fashion, do we not, about deposit guarantees. So when banks go broke through their own incompetence and chicanery, the taxpayer picks up the tab. It's theft from the taxpayer. And until we start sending bankers, and I include central bankers and politicians, to prison for this outrage, it will continue.
All right, so one of the challenges also is if you live in a country where they just decide to go into your bank and you take a haircut, they take 10% off the top because the government needs to pay their bills. It's happened in Cyprus, it's happened in Greece. Basically, the banks just, confiscate money. There's also roughly 2.5 billion people around the world, including people in this country, that do not have access to banking services. So they care about something like Bitcoin because it allows them to essentially have a banking service on their phone. Anybody who uses a bank that's had their account locked or, was a victim of Operation Choke Point, they care. Most people have never heard of Operation Choke Point, but it was a U.S. government operation that actually started under the Obama administration, which tried to use the banks to shut down businesses that were not deemed proper, I guess, by the government. So you had people who maybe sold guns as part of their business, and the government leaned on the banks to close their banking services. People who offered money services were shut out. Payment processing services were shut out. Pawn shops were shut out. These people were all in business and lost access to their banks under Operation Choke Point. And this is the list of what the government deemed risky businesses, right? So basically, the government then, weaponized the banking system to try to force people out of business if they were in a line of business that was not basically okay. And this is the US government. We're not talking about, a banana republic. So the ability to have a banking or a financial system that's not controlled by the government has a lot of value to people that have suffered under this. I'm sorry? Okay.
I think someone was unmuted for a second.
Okay. All right. So we'll keep going because I want to keep moving through fairly quickly.
Financial privacy underpins the right to freedom of expression, freedom of association, freedom of the vote, freedom of assembly. Because without those basic financial privacy rights, if everything you do can be tracked through your payments, your purchases, then all of your associations and all of your expression and all of your acts of freedom can then be punished after the fact severely enough to deter anyone from exercising those freedoms.
So that's a key point when we think about a cashless society. If everything's tracked, we're at the mercy of being shut out of the system, which is what happened to WikiLeaks when the banks were told not to process credit card payments for them. And then they basically just raised all their donations in Bitcoin. So they were able to remain in business. World travelers who pay lots of fees when they convert money. As we said, if this is universal, then you don't have to convert the money in many cases. People who remit money internationally, which in 2017, 7.2% was the fee for sending money internationally. But, a lot of places were higher. Global remittances in 2018, $689 billion. So think about all the fees paid on all that money being sent around the world, people sending money back to their families and whatnot. Because typically what happens is, you send the money, it goes through your bank, they send it to an intermediary bank to convert it to the funds of the local bank, which then sends it to the beneficiary, and everybody in that process is taking a cut and charging a fee. Whereas on the Bitcoin network, because it's peer-to-peer, you're dealing directly, you can send money without using the bank, so you're bypassing those fees. So, some certain businesses, you need to be careful that their business model doesn't get eliminated. A user posted online that he used Western Union to wire $4,000 to his family in the Middle East. He paid $78 in transfer fees and $116 in currency exchange fees. That's a lot of money to send, money back to your family. Whereas somebody transferred $194 million of Bitcoin and paid 10 cents in network fees. So basically everyone should care about these things. Cash is under attack, and in many places it may soon become illegal. And your ability to have anonymous private transactions goes away. So beware of a cashless society. It's, you may think it's convenient, but freedom and privacy would be limited. And when all the cash is gone, how do you buy anything if your computer tells you, no, you can't access the banking system, or you can't buy something. And this kind of tells you a little bit about what that is.
If the government can watch everything you do, if they can watch every time you spend money, their ability to control your behavior is enormous. And it will put people at the mercy of a system in which, at a flick of a binary switch, you can become a non-person. Went to the wrong website, attended the wrong protests, associated with the wrong political party, expressed support for the wrong idea, off. You no longer exist.
If you get cut out of the banking system, there's not much you can do. And that's already going on in China. It's called their social credit score. We're not going to get into that here, but you can see in the news too in Russia, right? Opposition politicians are being cut out of the banking system. And what do? They turn around and they raise money in Bitcoin. And a French bank shut down a customer because they posted a criticism of the bank online, and all their accounts were closed. So we're at the mercy of the system. Another quick.
And we even turn around and condemn cash, the ultimate peer-to-peer, anonymous, fungible mechanism that for millennia has provided financial services to everyone, basic financial services. And cash has one fatal flaw, and it's not that it's anonymous, that it's its greatest feature. And it's not that it's used by criminals. Criminals get a banking license and defraud people by the millions. Its greatest feature is that it is available to everyone without vetting. Its greatest feature is that it is an open, transparent, neutral, verifiable, peer-to-peer transactional system. And its greatest weakness is that it is constrained by geography and locality. It doesn't have range and scale. And now we have a new form of digital cash, which is also open, and it's also neutral and verifiable, unforgeable, transportable. But this one is borderless. It's censorship resistant. It can be used even when your government doesn't want you to use it. It can be used without privilege, without identity. And it can be used everywhere in the world by whoever wants to use it by simply downloading the software and running it on whatever computing device they can afford. That is the real revolution here. And while we're having our little privileged discussions about, should we regulate crypto? How much should we regulate crypto? Who should regulate crypto? Fuck that. Crypto is about providing universal basic finance to whoever needs it, everywhere in the world, whether we like it or not. And what will people do with universal basic finance? What they've done for millennia with access to cash. They will build a future for their children. We are paralyzed by the fear of a few bad actors, blinded by the fact that the worst actors are the ones who act with state privilege and endorsement, with the intelligence agencies hand in hand, inside the surveillance capitalism mechanism to fund dictators and drug lords all around the world with our tax money to the tune of trillions. The real terrorism, the real drug financing doesn't happen in cash. It happens in millions of barrels of oil and billions of pallets of dollars transmitted through wire transfers by the banks who get caught again and again and again and again. And they pay a fine that is a fraction, not only of the criminal behavior that they profited from, but of the tens of thousands of deaths they've directly contributed to. And not a single person goes to jail. And at the same time, some people have the audacity to say that we need to end cash in order to stop crime. How magnificently self-righteous. In the United States, 18% of the population does not have access to banking services. That's 60 million people. I recited this fact at a banking conference, and one lady in the back raised her hand and said, "Why should we give illegals bank accounts?" That's a chilling statement to make. Let me translate it to you in words that will make more of an impact. Those people don't deserve the privilege of financial inclusion. Those people. When your neighbor says, those people don't belong in our neighborhood, it freaks you out because you suddenly realize you're living next to a bigot. But when a banking regulator says, why should we give illegals a bank account? I calmly responded, you shouldn't. We will. At the last conference I attended, after I gave a speech decrying the lack of security and financial inclusion, a young man came to me and said, this really spoke to my personal story. Young man in his 20s has been living in Western and developed countries for the past 15 years, has not been able to open a bank account in 15 years. Every time I write my name and place of birth in the application, the process is already ended. I was born in Iran. I didn't choose that. I didn't do anything. I pay my taxes. I have a job. All I want is to deposit my paycheck in a bank account so I can buy groceries. For 15 years, I've been unable to do that. That is the face of the unbanked. There are people walking the streets around you in this city of privilege, in the independent district of the city of London, bought and paid for by banking corporations, in this little enclave that is the Vatican of capitalism, a city within a city. People walking around you, invisible people, your janitors, your service professionals, the people making you a sandwich who don't have a bank account, who take their paycheck in cash and they go to various places in order to ask for payday loans. Maybe they take a check or other form of payment they can't deposit, and they get charged 10 or 15% or 30% to send money home to their loved ones so they can support a basic life of subsistence. That's the unbanked. They're right here in this city. Don't imagine the great masses of Africa. Of course, they're unbanked, or Southeast Asia, or South America, right here, your neighbors. And they have been made to live in that position just so we can continue this illusion that safety comes from totalitarian surveillance.
All right, and Bitcoin isn't alone, right? There are a whole host of other cryptocurrencies. Many of you probably heard about Dogecoin in the news lately with Elon Musk. All right, any questions so far before we move on? I want to keep moving through fairly quickly. So how does it work? So a blockchain is what makes Bitcoin work. And a blockchain is basically a shared accounting ledger. And it uses cryptography to secure it. But we've had accounting ledgers for, hundreds and hundreds of years. So that's nothing new. But it works a little bit different. It's not like a spreadsheet where when you update the information, you replace it. It is much like a checkbook ledger. So the ledger holds the history of the information. History is not erased, it's just added to. So this Bitcoin ledger contains all the history of all the transactions. So let me explain it using paper, right? If we all live in the same village and we all do transactions with each other, throughout the day, we record those. We tell the town accountant, this is what we did and who owes who what money. And at the end of the day, the accountant has a sheet with all those transactions on it. They take that sheet, they go staple it on the fence outside of City Hall. They overlay it over the sheet from the previous day, and then they put their thumbprint in wax. So basically what you have is building on top of each other all of these transactions. You can go back to the first day, you can see all of the transactions, everybody can verify them. And the purpose of the wax thumbprint is so that you can tell whether somebody's tried to tamper by replacing a sheet and changing transactions. That's essentially how Bitcoin works, except we don't use wax thumbprints, we use cryptography. So how does it work? And I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but hopefully you'll be able to stay with me. This is just kind of real high level stuff, but what is a hash? A hash is essentially a digital fingerprint for a data set, okay? So the term hash means digital fingerprint for data. But the term hash is also used to represent the algorithm that creates that digital fingerprint, takes your input and creates your output. The same input will always give you the same output. It's deterministic, okay? And when you hash data, you could take any size data and you'll still get a fixed size. So let me show you some examples of what I mean. If you took the phrase, this is a test, and ran it through a common hash program, you would get that string of numbers. That is the hash, that's the digital fingerprint. That string represents that phrase. But if you were to change the capital T to a small t, it completely changes the digital fingerprint. You get something completely different because it is a different, unique set of data. And you could put anything into these algorithms. You can put, numbers, you can put words, you can put files, you can put movies, you can put music, and you can get a digital fingerprint for any digital data. And that's important because if you were to take the data, for example, that goes into a blockchain and create a hash of that data for each of the transactions, you can then take the hashes, the digital fingerprints for each piece of data, and hash them together and get a hash of the hashes until you get to the very top, in which case you have a hash which is a digital fingerprint that represents all of the data in that tree, which means that if somebody tries to change any piece of data anywhere in that tree, those hashes change and it flows up to the top and it completely changes the digital fingerprint of that data set. So you can very quickly determine whether that data has been tampered with. And the way the blockchain works, the way Bitcoin works, is that each block of data that's stored contains the hash of the previous block of data. And so if you invalidate any particular block, every block that comes after it becomes invalid because the identifying fingerprint of the data is changed. So let me show you real quick what that means.
The critical part of including a block into a blockchain is the inclusion of a cryptographic hash of the previous block. In this way, blocks are linked all the way back to the very first Genesis block and are verified by hashes. Because each block contains the previous hash, and that gets hashed within the next block, in a sense, all the previous hashes are baked in to all future block hashes. This is where the real immutability comes in. All the blocks are connected through the interrelationships of all their hashes. You can see here a sequence of blocks, each with their associated data, hashes, and nonces. If anything is changed anywhere in the chain, there's a ripple effect, invalidating all the blocks that come afterwards. Suppose a malicious person, Carl, was trying to alter a transaction on the chain. As we know, you can't just change data, because that would create an invalid block. So you'd have to remine that block, and find a nonce that yields a hash value below the target difficulty. And since all the following blocks must contain the hash of the previous block, all the following blocks would be invalidated as well. Only if Carl had an incredible, near impossible amount of computing power would he be able to rebuild the whole chain to include his fraudulent transaction. And Carl doesn't have nearly that much computing power. That robustness is the power of the distributed blockchain, and why it's thought of as being incorruptible.
All right, so I want to show you this video. I think this is a great video, and it explains a little bit more in real terms how cryptocurrency works using some of the concepts that we've talked about.
When you want to buy something normally, using your normal bank card, this is what happens. I give my card details to the shop asks the bank if I'm good for the money. The bank checks its records to see if I've got enough in my account. If I do, it lets the shop know. It updates its records to show the movement of money from my account to the shop's. Oh, and it takes a little cut for its trouble. Now, if you wanted to remove the bank from that system, who else would you trust to keep those records and not alter them or cheat in any way? Well, I wouldn't trust you. I wouldn't trust you. In fact, I wouldn't trust any single person. But I might trust everyone. The idea is you don't have a central record of transactions. Instead, you distribute many, many copies of this ledger around the world. Each owner of each copy records every transaction. So, to buy something using cryptocurrency, I give the shop my details. The shop asks all the bookkeepers if I'm good for the money. The bookkeepers all check their records to see if I have enough. If I do, they tell the shop, and then all update their records to show the movement of money. So there's no way that a forged transaction can make it in. If I try to alter a ledger, it won't match all of the other copies. And it gets rejected. Oh, and one of them, at random, will be given a reward of some newly created cryptocurrency. This is how cryptocurrencies work. And remember, all of these bookkeepers, all of these ledgers, they're not actually people. their computers. Lots of computers.
All right, we've covered a lot of stuff tonight, but we're gonna leave it there. Did that make sense in terms of, you know, Bitcoin and blockchain operate using this shared ledger, and everybody who's on the network keeps a copy of the ledger and verifies it. So there's no central bank. There's no need to pay anybody to be in the middle. And then this allows people to freely send money back and forth, digital currency that is not controlled by a government, can't be deflated by a government, can't be shut down by a government. It's effectively digital cash. I know we covered a lot in a short period of time, but do we have any questions?
Yeah. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, when I watch the TV and the financial channels, they have a value for Bitcoin. And it seems like it goes up and down by not pennies, but by thousands of dollars if you wanted to acquire the Bitcoin. Why am I not just making an investment? Why, rather than buying a stable currency? It doesn't seem to be stable at all.
Well, right now it's not, because, you know, it's still a young currency, but, you know, over time it will level out, much like, you know, any other currency. But the thing is that it's driven by demand, right? And there is a limited supply of Bitcoin. So people want to get whatever they can because it's limited, and they're using it more right now as a store of value as opposed to a currency. So it's really being used more like gold right now than it is being used like a dollar.
Except that goes up by thousands and down by thousands every day.
That's true.
Like gold won't change that much. Dollar doesn't change that much. But the Bitcoin right now is changing tremendously.
Yep, it is. It is.
So you're taking a gamble because it can go up high, in which case you have more money. But if it goes down low, you're going to lose money.
Sure.
Right?
Much the same way that stocks
It's
are
like
traded.
buying a stock or something.
Yeah, very similar.
Right.
But
That's
it has
a little different than a currency.
Well, but the thing is that it has all of the other attributes that make it available as a currency, right? And so there are other digital currencies that are being developed that are not nearly as volatile, and they all have different, you know, unique properties. But it's the underlying technology really that is the value, right? The ability to send money very inexpensively. I mean, you can send money around the world and it would cost you an arm and a leg using the SWIFT network, and it may take a week to get to some remote location in you know, the Far East. You know, so it, you know, it's, if you're looking at it as an investment, that's one subset of people, investors, right? If you're looking at it as a technology, that's another subset of people. If you're looking at it as a store of value, that's another subset of people. So there are various contingencies in there that are all using it and doing things, you know, for different purposes.
Yeah, I have a question. I know one of the criticisms of cryptocurrency is the amount of energy that it requires. Is that from the process of so many things simultaneously checking the ledgers, the amount of computer power that takes, or where is that energy?
So the energy comes from, it's a combination, but most of the energy, some of the energy are, you know, people using the network, but most of the energy are the computers that are called miners. They're the ones that are validating the transactions and producing the blocks, and basically they're calculating hashes to try to be the entity that's awarded the new cryptocurrency because they publish the block. Those are big operations, and they take a lot of energy because you're running a lot of computer equipment, okay? Now, a lot of, I think about 70 to 75% of the energy that's being used by those miners is renewable energy, because it is such an expensive component of what they do. They look for the cheapest energy they can find. So if they can locate themselves near a hydro plant and get cheap energy, or some other form of cheap energy, they also locate in cold environments so that they don't need as much energy to cool their equipment. So again, they're driving demand for cheaper energy, which will help reduce some of the costs. But the thing is their energy use is very transparent. You can see it, you can calculate it. What you don't see is what's the energy use in the traditional banking system, right? You've got buildings, you've got people, you've got travel, you've got jets flying around. In that respect, to operate a financial system globally, it probably costs many, many times more than what Bitcoin's expending.
Thank you.
How much does it cost when you buy? Who gets a commission?
Joseph.
Yeah, how much time does it take to finish transaction?
Well, it depends upon which cryptocurrency you're using. Some are almost instantaneous. Bitcoin transactions transmit almost instantaneously, okay? But typically a new block of data is published every 10 minutes. And the further back in the chain your transaction is, the more secure it is, right? If it's in the middle of the chain versus in the current block, it's protected. So some people will wait until there's multiple transactions or confirmations, which could be 30 seconds, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, but the transaction actually takes place immediately.
Okay, thank you.
Hello?
Yes.
Hi. Recently there's been these ransom payments and they're all paid in Bitcoin. Can that be traced through the blockchain?
Yes. Yes, it can be traced, but the challenge is that all of the transactions in the blockchain are visible and you can see the movement of all the money, but you don't necessarily know who owns that account. You don't necessarily know who owns that account. You just know that that account has the money. And law enforcement watches those accounts because they're looking to try to find if that money is converted into dollars or euros or yen, then they can go to the bank and try to figure out who was it that converted it. So, Bitcoin is not anonymous, and it would actually be better for the ransomware people if you dropped off a suitcase of money and they picked it up and they got away with it, because then they would be completely anonymous.
Okay.
Any other questions? Anybody else?
Oh, I think you're muted, sir, if you're talking to us.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, when you buy a Bitcoin from one of these companies that are selling the various cryptocurrencies, do they take a commission?
Typically they will if they're an exchange. So an exchange is pretty much similar to going to Schwab to buy your stocks or whoever. They'll take a small fee, but you can buy, if you wanted to buy Bitcoin from someone for example, like if you and I were to do a transaction, you could give me $20 and I can transmit to you $20 worth of Bitcoin and I wouldn't charge you a fee for that, right? So there are a whole host of ways to get it. And that's part of what we'll talk about in the next session, is how to acquire it, where you can acquire it. And there's different varying levels of fees. There are places that have much lower fees, and then there are places like Bitcoin ATMs, which are going to typically charge much higher fees. But yes, you know.
Do the different forms of Bitcoin have different values, or is it all the same value?
Well, there's only one form of Bitcoin.
Just companies,
Cryptocurrency.
just different cryptocurrencies.
Just different cryptocurrencies. So, you know.
But they all have, it's all one price? Or
Well, all the different
have different prices.
All the different cryptocurrencies, think of them as different stocks. Each one has its own value, market value, and its own price. And then, you know, if you pegged it to the US dollar, you can compare how much they are, you know, versus each other.
Okay.
And we'll look at some of that in the next session. We'll look at, you know, some websites where you can go look at the prices and see, you know, see how much they are.
Thank you.
So when you buy something with a cryptocurrency, you have to determine which one you're buying from, because which Bitcoin you're going to use, or one of the other ones?
Yeah, so certain vendors may take different cryptocurrencies. So for example, a vendor may accept Bitcoin, and they may accept Litecoin, and they may accept Monero or Dash. These are all different types of cryptocurrencies. So if they advertise that they accept different cryptocurrencies, you can select which one you'd like to use. So in much the same way that, you know, you could typically go to a vendor and say, I want to pay you in US dollars, or, you know, you can pay in Canadian dollars or whatever. But they have to accept that currency. You can't just choose to pay with one that they don't accept.
Thank you.
I missed the beginning of the lecture, and you said it's being recorded. Can I watch?
We'll post it on the library YouTube channel. So you'll be able to check that out in a couple days. It should be up.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
So when is the next part 2?
I believe it's 2 weeks from tonight.
Yes, Thursday, June 10th at 7 p.m. I hope everyone's able to join us. I posted a link in the chat to, if you'd like to sign up for that second session. It will be about using Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. I can also send the link out to everyone that registered for this program.
Yeah, could you? That would be good. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, we're going to talk more about these exchanges. We're going to talk more about cryptocurrency wallets and the software that's used to track, and how to send and receive, and so it'll be much more, you know, practical usage. But I wanted to make sure everyone understood some of the important factors and the foundations for cryptocurrency. It's a very, very powerful technology, and the underlying technology of blockchain, which is what powers Bitcoin, you know, has many, many more uses than just Bitcoin. And that's where companies are trying to take advantage of using blockchain in things like supply chain or pharmaceuticals or healthcare, because what they found is that this distributed ledger system, you know, that's very secure, can be used in a variety of ways.
Why is the amount, you still going?
Yeah.
Why is the amount of Bitcoin fixed? And what's to say, you know, 10 years from now, everybody's using it, you want to produce more of it?
Well, the reason it was fixed was to prevent deflation of the value, right? So Bitcoin, as it stands, will only ever have 21 million Bitcoins, but it goes out to, you know, so many. It goes out to 8 decimal places, so it can be broken down into very, very small units. But other cryptocurrencies are experimenting with different mechanisms to allow for increased amounts, but in ways that control how much the inflation would be. So the underlying focus is still in preventing a currency from being able to be replicated like we're doing today with the Fed just printing trillions of dollars. so that, you know, people can rely on it a little bit more and have a little bit more faith in what the value will be in the future.
Yeah, but as the demand goes up, then either you're gonna have to produce more Bitcoin or the value of the Bitcoin is gonna go up.
Is going to
Because
go
people
up.
want- Right?
That's
So in
right.
essence, it's like an investment. Really. If it goes, you can make a lot of money.
Sure, sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you. This has been very informative. I have learned a lot. I know Bitcoin and cryptocurrency has been a hot item in the news lately. I hope everyone else here has enjoyed this program. Any final questions before we log off until 2 weeks from now?
All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and I hope, you know, everything made sense. If you come up with some questions or something is still confusing, we'll take a little bit of time at the next session to maybe address those before we jump into the new content.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thanks, everyone.